You're listening to Talk in the Library, a National Library of Israel podcast.
Our stories are carried in our books, shared, argued over, translated, and passed from one generation to the next. For decades, Israeli literature has been part of that global conversation. But today, the conversation feels more fragile. What is the place of Israeli writers in the world right now? And what does it mean when literature itself becomes contested ground? We're joined by a legendary Jerusalem-based literary agent to help us understand the state of play for Israeli and Jewish authors today. Welcome to Talk in the Library. I'm Wendy Singer.
And I'm Shai Ben-Ari. Our guest today is Deborah Harris, founder of the Deborah Harris Agency in Jerusalem. The agency has represented the translation and dramatic rights of leading Israeli and Palestinian writers in more than 50 countries. It also acts as co-agent in Israel for more than 200 international publishers and literary agencies. Deborah has played a critical role in shaping the Israeli literary scene, as well as bringing the region's literature to a world audience. Deborah Harris has been a board member of the Jerusalem International Book Fair for over 30 years. She was awarded the Friend of Jerusalem Prize in 2011, the International Literary Agent of the Year Award in 2018, and the National Jewish Book Award in 2020. Enjoy the conversation. Deborah Harris, thank you very much for being with us. And, I'd like to begin with the beginning of your career, really. You began your career as a literary agent back in 1982 during a war. Not an ordinary beginning at all, I would say, but maybe you could tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. And first, thank you so much for hosting me today. It's really a pleasure to be with both of you. I had never been in a war before. I'd made Aliyah in late 79, and I was part of a small group of people that put together a publishing house, and I wanted to do a war book. And I was watching Channel 1 every night, and I thought that Ehud Yaari was just this outstanding military journalist. And so I decided that I was going to go find him.
This was in the First Lebanon War.
I had a friend that was going to Miluim, and I got to the border, and then there were other cars going, and I found myself with Arik Sharon and Begin, and I was in another car behind them. It was all of these ministers, as one does. And I was like a 23-year-old pisher. And people kept asking me, what are you doing here? And I kept saying, I'm meeting Ehud Yaari. And we're passing the Beaufort, and then we pass the Beirut Highway. And I'm seeing war up front. Right. And dead bodies, and we just kept going. And at one point, I'm stopped by the army, and they said, what are you doing here? And I said, I'm meeting Ehud Yaari, and they said, oh, no, you're not. And they escorted me back, and then about 2 days later, he called me. He said, I heard you're looking for me. And I said, yeah, I want to do a book about the war. He said, I have a publisher, but I need an agent. And I said, well, I'm not an agent. I'm a publisher. He goes, if you got past the Beirut-Damascus highway, you are an agent.
There you go. And
that was how our relationship, and my first book, he was the first client I ever had.
Right.
He and Zev Schiff.
Never looked back.
Never looked back.
So before we dig into our real conversation here, I'd like for you, if possible, to sketch out a picture the kind of global impact that Israeli literature had before things got rather more difficult in recent years. Let's say if you could mention a few of the more iconic books that people around the world have read or even just know about.
Well, I think that in the 60s, 70s, 80s, there were literary giants who were Israeli. There were also Jewish writers in America, some in Europe, where they really influenced each other. They were very different, but they created a literary persona together. And this one would be friends. Appelfeld would be friends with someone from Europe, and Philip Roth would befriend Amos Oz, and Saul Bellow would come to Jerusalem. And there was this camaraderie. Yeah. And I think it created a Jewish-Israeli high-profile sense of literature. They were more than writers. They were the moral backbone. They spoke and people listened. And I think that David Grossman very much continued that kind of gravitas.
Right.
And he has friends outside of the Jewish community, but authors who really see him as a moral compass for this country. In the 80s and 90s, even after that, there were new voices being presented all the time. It wasn't just a matter of Amos Oz or Aleph Bet Yeshua or Appelfeld. There was Edgar Keret. Right. There was Dorit Rabinyan. And there were new voices being introduced that publishers wanted to take a chance on.
Yeah.
And some examples of some of the more iconic titles.
Well, I think Meir Shalev really broke into that. There was a young writer named Amir Goodfreund who passed away at a very young age, but he had already been published in many, many languages. Bat Yagur did it in her detective books. There was genre-breaking openness. And that also led to theater and film and television. It broke through the creative walls. And everyone was looking for their Israeli writer that they felt most expressed their publishing house's taste.
And the runaway bestsellers, like the ones that, when you think of that era, you think of these books. Is that A Pigeon and a Boy? Is it?
Pigeon and a Boy did really well. I think Amos Oz, his memoir, The Tale of Love and Darkness, was probably the most important Israeli book translated. It really impacted on the way people saw the history of his history, but also the history of the country.
Right. Let's speak for a moment about the past decade or two, I would say. You describe a certain shift from literary fiction and poetry being the focus within Israeli literature towards a different thing, big idea nonfiction. The previous sort of stream, maybe the exemplars are David Grossman or Yehuda Amichai, and that new stream, perhaps best personified by *Sapiens* by Yuval Noah Harari. So two different, very different directions. Do you see that kind of shift? Is that a global trend, or are we talking about a particular Israeli phenomenon?
It's a global trend, but it's also, if you've been in this industry as long as I have, you know that it's as if every culture gets their decade or two. So I was very fortunate. I was in the decades where Israeli literature really was very successful. There were decades where Indian literature was really successful.
Yeah.
There was, we just went through a period where Italian women went through their great success with Anna Neferrante and others.
My brilliant friend.
Yes,
yeah.
Which deserves all the credit in the world. But there are times where a certain culture has the light shone upon them. So we had our time. It's not like we didn't. I think, though, that now there's a lot of Palestinian, Iraqi, Lebanese, Jordanian literature. I've read a lot of it. Some of it is good. Some of it is there as more of a political statement rather than a literary statement. But this is that time. American literature, I think, is in a huge decline. Irish literature is always the best. No one can compete with them. But we had our time. And then that time transitioned into more, I think, the writers that were getting the attention were nonfiction writers.
Right,
and I think that certainly Yuval Harari broke through in a tremendous way, and his ideas were very original, and his persona, he has a personality that was very, very progressive, modern, that people really responded to.
Right.
And that book was sold into 70-something languages.
Yeah. Recommended by presidents of the United States, of course.
Right.
That kind of impact, I mean, few books ever achieve anything like that. What kind of lessons do you think can be learned from that case, maybe in relation to the issue that we're really going to discuss here, the problem of the Israeli book industry?
Well, I think that publishers still very much look at Israelis for the big, smart ideas. It may not be told through literature, and it may not be a fictionalized version, but I think that the leaders of publishing houses know that there are some really, really smart people here, and they should be paid attention to.
Right. His perspective, Yuval Harari's perspective, is extremely unique. You know, Israelis get credit for often seeing the world in a unique way, in a different way, but I would say Yuval is probably unique even among Israelis. Does it strike you as a very Israeli book, Sapiens?
No.
No. Right.
Not at all.
Not in an obvious way, certainly.
Not at all. No. But what makes Yuval so successful is that he's completely universal. Does he carry Jewish values, morality? Yes, of course he does. And his sense of commitment to Israel, even though he no longer lives here, is still, I think politically he may, he has issues, but he certainly sees himself as an Israeli citizen.
So let's talk about the period when things get more complicated. In October of 2024, you and Jessica Jacobs wrote this op-ed in the New York Times, Stop the Boycott of Israeli Culture. Now, in it, you said, it cannot be that the solution to the conflict is to read less, not more, and that such boycotts contradict the very thing that literature is supposed to do. So what is literature supposed to do?
Oh, literature is supposed to allow you to liberate yourself and feel someone else's experience. You are in their shoes. You know what their life feels like. I'm now reading. It's not an easy time for me to read, but
for all of us.
But I'm reading a Pakistani book, for example. That it's about a young man in Pakistan. It is so thrilling for me to be that person, to know what that feels like. And that's what literature does. But there is a stubbornness now. There's a closed-mindedness. People don't want to inhabit certain lives. And one of the lives, or the lives that readers are resisting, is the lives of someone in Tel Aviv, the lives of someone in Jerusalem, male, female, straight, gay. It's just not happening. And it's a resistance that begins with younger editors, younger publicists who sit at the editorial table and say, I don't feel comfortable working on a book by an Israeli. So I think the gatekeepers are very much impacted by the younger staff of publishing houses, editorial, publicity. And I think it is the older generation that's now perhaps looking for the big idea books I don't think it is a consistent lack of openness to Israeli works, but the literature is not working. But I also must say that the literature being written here now is not great literature. It's just not a time of great creativity. I think it's really hard for people to have a perspective. There isn't a book that I thought, oh, I'm so sorry, I missed this one. I have 2 books that I will not stop agenting until I sell them. But it may take a long time, but I will sell them, and they have nothing to do with Israel.
There's a interesting point there. Like, is there just too much going on here for people to write? Or
And it's the same thing. People's perspective. You read one book and you say, I think I read this already. It's like all the books feel the same.
Yeah.
There's not a clear, distinct voice that has come out of this period.
This situation, this last couple of years.
No.
But when you wrote that piece in the New York Times, which got a lot of attention, there must have been some gathering clouds that caused you to put that together.
The clouds had begun years before.
So
they did not
what
start
did that
in
look like?
October 23rd. Yeah. It felt like people, first of all, the Jerusalem International Book Fair, which then became the Forum, was always a gathering of very, very committed publishers. And it was so successful because they had an editorial program and everybody wanted to be in the editorial program. And because of different times of what Israel was going through, people did not want to come anymore. They were scared. It was war. It was terrorism.
October 7th.
Yes.
2023.
Yes. So already the book fair began to lose its power. And that had been a real force in bringing people together and bringing authors to meet publishers. And there were events where authors had their exposure to international publishers. So the kind of the fall of the book forum was a real loss. A real loss for us. There wasn't the same kind of exposure, and a lot of the people that used to come no longer felt that same sense of commitment. What happened was, and the book fair was always very, very social, and I found a lot of people who had been in my house who I knew really well just were not answering me.
And this was like what year? Like when did it start to actually be felt?
It was in the early 2020, 2018, 2020. It was already...
Pre-COVID, yeah.
BDS was in the air, the whole movement there, yeah.
That's right.
It was just people not responding, some people saying, I think you should take a break from submitting your books to me.
Now's not the right time.
And and when you think you have a personal relationship, it's just you're not prepared for that. But that is what it feels like. It feels like one big ghost when you make a big submission and you know that 5 years ago you would have sold it on the first submission and half the people aren't even responding to you. Or they're saying very generic things like, I wouldn't know how to position this author. Which means everything.
Right. Which means everything. So we're very interested in understanding better what is this, call it a boycott or call it a global chill, but what does it actually look like in terms of the gatekeepers on the one hand, and then these anecdotes that you hear out on the field. I mean, Gabrielle Zevin's best-selling novel, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, was removed from a Chicago bookstore. And you have this viral Google Doc. Who is your favorite Zionist author?
We were on a hit list. We were on a hit list at one of the book fairs in London or Frankfurt. Whoever met with any of us should be no longer spoken to. And we were It was very, very painful.
What are some of the other, like what you call these other gatekeepers, whether it's publishers?
It's publishers, it's bookstores, not hosting events, it's newspapers not reviewing your books, it's the incapacity to get a blurb, and without a blurb, you're really lost. And God bless Nicole Krauss, who is one of the most generous blurbers. And she knew that like a lot of this fell upon her. But to get a blurb was impossible. To get beyond the echo chamber of a publicity department who didn't really want to take that book on anyway, and having a publicist who's saying nobody wants to review it, nobody wants to blurb, and then the book dies. There's no attention. And it's terrible. And then book events are canceled. But then what happened was, and
book events, book tours, just everything.
Everything becomes canceled. But the positive thing that happened is that the Jews came together.
So tell us about that.
It's a phenomenon. I have Jewish colleagues all over the world who I know I can work with. And it's not, they're not just Jews. They're not just Jews. They're Jews. They are Christians who support Israel. Yeah. And no one would know that
Philo-Semites.
Philo-Semites. Yeah. But we all found each other. And we know who we can count on. Which editor would be open to this kind of book, which project could go to that publisher. And it's quite international. And in the U.S., there are people who, like the 92nd Street Y has become so great. There are other venues. There's New Reads, the Jewish Book Council.
Can you talk about New Reads? Because that was an interesting one, which is they did this paid subscription platform, which had 2,000
They are picking a book every month where you are a member of a club, and you get that book. And it's great exposure to new voices, to new literature, but everybody is coming up with new ideas. I keep telling everybody, everyone should buy an Israeli book every month. It's a birthday, it's an anniversary. Buy an Israeli book that's sitting in the back of the bookstore or sitting, in an Amazon warehouse. Buy a Jewish book. Buy an Israeli book.
Every month.
Every month. Every month. Every week.
Deborah, it's interesting that you put it that way because I'm in a book club here in Jerusalem with about a dozen women friends from the neighborhood. And there was a book we were supposed to read that was on our list. We've learned that the author was honoring the boycott against Israeli authors. And it generated a whole conversation of, can we support that kind of an author at a time when there are so many authors that are not getting their idea? Let me ask you about PEN America or PEN US. I mean, this is the organization that is supposed to be safeguarding a literary free expression and has just a, decades long history of doing just that. But in the last couple of years, we hear these stories about PEN America ousting their longtime CEO because she wouldn't condemn Israel for committing genocide. And they had at their 90th international conference, they accepted Palestine as a member. They rejected Israel as a member. And there's just a whole host of stories coming out of this one organization that's supposed to be protecting these freedoms and seems to be doing the exact opposite.
Wendy, it is one of the most painful things. I was on a trip here. I was hosting two of the people that came to Israel the Israelis very much wanted to have a branch to resurrect the Israeli branch.
So PEN Israel is what they wanted to set up.
And it was not accepted. Those people went home, one left, one stayed on for a while in her position. PEN International and PEN America are two separate organizations. PEN International is very, very complicated. I can say that in the last couple of weeks, PEN America has reached out to me in a very constructive way. They want to become proactive they now understand the situation that we are talking about. They claim that they did not realize how things had deteriorated. And we've had some very, very constructive conversations about what can be done. And I used as a model, there's a group of British Jewish publishers and agents who came together right after the war and became this power group and approached the 5 major houses in the UK and exposed what was going on. But they did it in a very, very smart and constructive way. What always surprised me was that in America, there was not the equivalent group of agents and publishers where
Very interesting.
so many people are Jewish. And this group of British literary publishing people really put themselves on the line and did it in a country that you don't do that in so quickly. And there was not a similar response in America, which I just couldn't fathom. Since October 2023, I have not sold one book of literature. Not one. They also started noticing the famous tables in bookstores where you go and you go to the Middle East section, you go to the Middle East table, and there's nothing available if you want to read the other narrative. You may not agree with that narrative, but you offer both to your readers. And they began to see that there was nothing there. The tables don't have the Israeli narrative.
So that sort of dramatic image that, hey, there's nothing here, that
Completely.
opened up a conversation.
Yes.
And literature is where nuance is supposed to live. And if you boycott literature, you're removing
Correct.
the ability to be in conversation.
Exactly. So I think that people are noticing that now. There are books that are coming out. Mati Friedman has a new book, and it's getting so much attention.
Can you
And
say a word about his new book? Because we hosted him here on Talk in the
I love
Library.
this book. Have we ever been in a time where we needed heroes?
Yes.
And the idea of heroism, the idea of sacrifice for...
It's called Out of the Sky.
It's about a group of parachutists. Everyone knows Chana Senesh, but each one of these parachutists was also a literary person. So they were inventing their own heroism as they were dropping out of planes. They were creating this narrative where they wanted to impact upon European Jewry and to give them hope and to give them a place to know that they weren't alone, but that each one of them was a writer, creates this dual narrative, which is just so splendid.
And it's bubbling up the amazing story of Chana Senesh and her legacy.
Yeah.
And of course, there's a library connection there because Chana Senesh's own literary archive really exists today at the National Library. And Mati also did much of his research. I think, at the library. Wendy touched on it earlier that the boycott, it's a two-directional boycott. We have the Israeli authors who are not really being received today around the world, but there's also, as you also mentioned, international authors who don't necessarily want to be read in Israel. And I just wonder if you've ever had the opportunity to speak with some of these people. You don't need to name names, but I wonder what kind of conversations you've had on that level with the authors themselves or with their publishers.
Yes, it's very painful. It started off, actually, with rom-com writers
Oh, really?
and romantasy. Anyone who's on social media who lived in fear that somebody else would see that they've agreed to an Israeli publication. What happened is that many, mostly American, several, Irish, British, not that many Europeans, just decided that they would not. They refused to be published in Hebrew. Some of them came up with these really weird things. Well, if there's a Hebrew publisher in Berlin, we'll agree to that Hebrew publisher as long as they're not within, the boundaries of Israel. But it then spread from romantasy to some very, very big names, which was extremely upsetting. Thomas Pynchon has just refused. Thomas Pynchon, whose last book will be his last book, he will not agree now to be published in Israel. Have I spoken to some of these people? Sure. But they just don't feel... These are the same people who will not be published in Russia. They will not be published in Israel. And everywhere else is fine. Just not Russia and not Israel.
You've said in the past that one book can break the Israeli book curse. What did you mean by that?
Well, if the right book is published abroad and it's characters that people can relate to, and there's a character and a narrative, and it could break the curse. I haven't found it. In some ways, Dorit Rabinyan's book, All the Rivers, did that because it was a love story between a Palestinian and an Israeli woman. That conquered the hearts of many, many people. But we need something new. We need something new, and I don't know where it's going to come from. I have a feeling it will come from a genre-bending author. It will come from fantasy. It will come from science fiction. I don't think it's going to come from literary fiction.
Something out of left field.
Something that maybe it will be a graphic novel, but it will not be the standard kind of book.
Very interesting.
Let's take a look at the Jewish publishing world, per se. I'd be curious, beyond Israeli authors, if you could sort of paint a picture for us about what is happening with Jewish authors abroad. We know that there was a survey done by Canvas, which is this platform that supports Jewish culture and creativity, and by the Federation of Toronto, that said over 600 creators, authors, writers, artists were surveyed, and 2/3 of them expressed a sentiment that post-October 7th, their careers had been seriously impacted. So how big, how significant is this, and how different is it than what Israeli authors are experiencing?
I know that the impact is serious because our inbox is filled with requests to be represented by many of these people. That's one of the things that's happened is the world has those barriers, the geographic barriers no longer exist. 10 years ago, a Canadian writer wouldn't want an Israeli agent. Now they would want one. One of the problems that I hope is being resolved is that there's not enough quality Jewish publishing. You can't expect Simon & Schuster and Random House and HarperCollins and Macmillan to be the publisher of all of these books. But there should be commercial, professional publishing houses that concentrate on Jewish children's literature, Jewish adult literature. And there really isn't that. The Jewish Publication Society is very academic.
Right. It's true.
And there isn't a home for Jewish books. And I don't know why. I am assuming that I know that there are always different people working on plans to create a Jewish publishing house. Schocken, which had been a glorious Jewish publisher, was bought by Penguin Random House.
I wonder if there's part of the complication here is that, when you talk about Israeli literature, the perspective here, when you talk about the Israeli literary community, it's not necessarily a very Jewish perspective.
Completely.
Right. So
Right.
at least not on the surface level. Not everybody's Jewish, but I'm talking surface level here. Israeli writers often bring a very secular worldview, and that
Completely.
can clash with a more diaspora community, which is
Agreed.
more Jewish in
Right.
the traditional sense.
Right.
It's a distinction.
Yeah. One of the books that I will never stop trying to sell is a book called Nishamot, Souls by Ro'i Chen.
Okay.
And it is a Jewish book. It's not an Israeli book. It is a Jewish crazy book. And until I saw that, I'm not stopping.
Oh, good.
Fantastic.
Deborah, let's talk for a minute about Jewish philanthropy. Our colleague, Allison Lee, recently participated in a panel at the Jewish Funders Network conference in San Diego. And it was all about this topic. It was just sort of this global chill on not only Jewish and Israeli authors, but in sort of the cultural and arts scene writ large. And she shared with us a data point that also came from this Canvas impact report that Jewish donors are currently giving less than 0.33% of their funding to Jewish arts and culture. And at the same time, they're giving to secular arts and culture 10 times that amount.
That's extraordinary.
So where do you think the responsibility lies in the Jewish philanthropic world at this time?
If I could really recommend the best use, it would be to help translate from language to language, and it would be to help build international publishing houses so American readers can read Spanish books that are related to Judaism, so that the French community could read South American literature. Mm-hmm. The communities in each of these countries are serious, and they each need books, and they need the tradition and culture of Jewish publishing. And I think that if we divide up the world separately, it's not going to work.
I mean, you see these world-known museums and other cultural institutions around the world, museums and libraries and cultural centers that are getting multi-million-dollar grants from known Jewish philanthropists. And really is what you're saying that there should be some kind of an uptick or some kind of an increase in supporting Jewish cultural institutions and arts, etc.
Absolutely. And I don't think it should just be limited to literature. It should also go into the arts, into theater, into the aspects of culture that people around the world want to take part in. And I know for myself, when I travel, I always want to go to the Jewish museum in each little town, even if it's small. Those are the kinds of places. And then they each have a library, and you want to find the books there from that culture. And yes, that is the responsibility of Jewish donors.
You know, as we know, for a novelist, being optioned for film or for television, even more so these days, is often the moment where a novel reaches a whole new level, a global audience really. Has the boycott followed your writers into those fields as well?
Yes. I have books that were optioned 10 years ago where we were promised starring this one, directed by that one. And they're all in the freezer. That's how it's called. They're put in the freezer.
And with Fauda, we hear the same thing with Fauda and then Tehran and all these different series that are just, it's like the upstream part of the chill.
It is just so painful. And the people who are involved in doing it's very hard for them to have to call me and tell me. I think the one time I ever cried on a Zoom was when I was told that my film, which was supposed to have been, they were going to start photographing the following month, when I was told that it was being put in the freezer. And the sense of betrayal was so deep. I do think Israeli television is so great. Jewish television makers it's not going to end this way. This will come back. So much of the talent, when I think about why are there not great books being written now in Israel, I think a lot of those people have gone to television. They're smart, they're funny, they know how to build, whether it be a book or a television series. And I don't think this is the end of the story. I think the great minds of creators are now working in television more than they are in literature.
So it's a question of studios and producers, development executives. These are the people who are now afraid to touch this kind of thing, because we're talking about the industries where Jews made an impact.
I know. All of my colleagues who have put things in the freezer, they're all Jewish, and they're even Zionists. They feel terrible about this, and these are projects that are written by some of the greatest names in Israel, but they cannot be done now. They're scared. They're scared of the filming being interrupted. They're scared of strikes.
I know there's a producer named Wendy Sachs that did this movie called October 8, about everything that happened on college campuses across the U.S. after October 7th. And she just reached out to distributors, one after the next, some of the biggest names in Hollywood, and just nobody was interested. It was a chill. It was...
Well, our film, which was based on Noam Thibon's story, we won TIFF. And the father's story, which we did with a Canadian director, Barry Averick, we had this crazy story. In the documentary, we had used footage from the video cameras of Hamas, and then we were accused of not getting the rights to use that footage.
I remember this, and that was kicked out of the Toronto Film Festival.
And it was kicked out, and then we got back in, and we won. And that was our film, and I'm so proud of our agency for having done that.
We should just maybe remind our listeners that Amir Thibon is essentially a journalist living in one of the Gaza border communities. And on October 7th, of course, he came under attack, he and his family. And he immediately calls his father, who was a senior IDF general in the reserves, Noam Thibon, who came in and basically saved not only his family, but played a critical role.
Many people along the way. He and his wife, Gali, were tremendous heroes.
Right.
And the book, The Gates of Gaza, is an excellent read.
Yes. And won awards in England and in the U.S. And that was a book that really impacted on people.
Well, on the flip side, are there any good stories out there in terms of other gatekeepers that are...
Wendy, I'm really glad you're asking, because we've just been involved in developing a book with a Professor Liad Mudrik from Tel Aviv University's Sagol School of Neuroscience. And she is working on a book called 7 extraordinary days in the life of an ordinary brain. And we are now selling this all over the world. And the fact that she is acknowledged as this brain, not just expert, but that she's coming with a completely different, unique way of looking at the brain. And it's very, very exciting that countries who have been so anti-Israel, the first offer came from Spain, second offer Brazil, and so it's gone. And now we found her. The American publisher will be HarperCollins, who are so enthusiastic about working with her. And what it takes is the heads of houses to say, wow, this person is really extraordinary, and she's young, and I want to build this person in the world of publishing and documentaries, and it's really encouraging.
I keep thinking when you said that this isn't going to be the end of the story, the one line from these hundreds of funerals that we had here in the last couple of years is Sarit Zussman, at the funeral of her son Ben Zussman, said in her eulogy, this story has to have a good ending. And I think we need to keep that in mind about this story as well. Before we part for today, what would you like the listeners of Talk in the Library to take away from this conversation? What can we do?
What can you do? First of all, buy Israeli books. Buy an Israeli book for every occasion that you can. Also buy Jewish books. It's really important. It's not just about Israel. It's about Am Yisrael staying together and supporting each other. I also think that communities in New York, in Los Angeles, in Chicago, it's really easy to have an event for an author that's traveling through America. But there are smaller towns that need to have that kind of exposure to culture also. And if there is an Israeli writer or a Jewish writer who's putting together a book tour, welcome them into smaller towns. Make that author feel welcome. Create an event. Get your bookstore to do something. All of the culture cannot just be in New York and in LA. There are towns and cities in America and Canada that I know that the audiences are there. I have had Zooms with communities that are somewhat off the grid, and a group of women who are in a book club will ask me if I will meet with them. And it has been so embracing for me to be able to talk to them about books. And one of the things that they always feel is that they don't have the exposure to the authors that are traveling through America. So I think that every community, synagogue, museum, open your hearts and welcome writers and buy their books.
That's a great note to end on. And Deborah, thank you for joining us today. It means a lot that you were able to share the complexity of this story and let us hope for a better ending.
Better times. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This episode was recorded at Nomi Studios in Jerusalem. Join us next time.